All right, good evening. If you open your Bibles to we're going to look at the end of chapter 33, a couple things we did not get to talk about last week, and then connect that with 34 and 35. I appreciate all of you in being good listeners this morning to the reading of John and 1 John. I didn't make any comments at the end because I didn't want to ruin Jesus' sermon. But I will say this, I hope that one of the main things you caught was the emotion of Jesus in that last hour and his deep desire that not only the apostles but those who would believe on him through their word would be one together, unified, love each other as God had loved him and as he loved God and had loved even these apostles and those who would come after. And then all those years later, 50 to 60 years later, John speaks to the churches and says almost identically the same words. It says, this is what our Savior's hope was for us. Let's hold it fast. Just really moving to me and touched me, and I hope it did as well to you. Okay, in Job we are looking now at the section between 32 and 35. We've looked at 32 and 33 for the most part. Elihu, the young friend who has been present this whole time while he has listened to both Job and the other three friends giving their analysis of Job's problem. And Job, of course, giving great complaint during this time that he cannot find God, he cannot get God to answer him. And then Elihu comes on the scene and becomes one who will speak a different message than what the friends did, and will spend a good amount of time actually rebuking Job and trying to show Job the right way to think about these trials instead of the way that he has thought about it. So that's where we are. I think one of the critical points of chapter 33 that we discussed last week is given there in verses 13 down through verse 33. He begins with, why do you contend against him, saying he will answer none of man's words. And then Elihu says, God is speaking, but not in a way that you are aware of. And he speaks in one of two ways. He may speak more through visions and dreams, which of course was normal in the days of Job and the days of Abraham. Or he may speak to you through trials and through the pain on your bed. And one thing we did not mention is everything about this, of course, is to bring a man's soul back from the pit, and uses that word 5 times in this section. And then he says there in verse 23 and following, if there be for him an angel, a mediator, one of the 1,000 to declare to man what is right for him, and he is merciful to him and says, deliver him from going down into the pit, I have found a ransom. Let his flesh become fresh with youth. Let him return to the days of his youthful vigor. Then man prays to God, and he accepts him, and he sees his face with a shout of joy. And he restores to man his righteousness. He sings before men and says, I sinned and perverted what was right, and it was not repaid to me. He has redeemed my soul from going down into the pit, and my life shall look upon the light. If you've read all of the book of Job, what do the words Elihu gives here remind you of later in the book of Job? Ideas?
Actually, like God questioning Job.
Pardon?
God questioning Job, because there's just stuff that only God can know.
Okay.
You know, and
Okay.
it kind of reminds me of that section.
Yeah. Okay. Good. I think you're right. When you get to the end of Job, and you see what Job does, and you see how God acts, is it like this? It's exactly the same. It's almost identical. In fact, whether Elihu knows it or not, and I'm impressed that Elihu does not just come out and say, I'm the mediator, I'm the angel sent from God in order to rebuke you and to get you on the right path. He simply says this is possible, that maybe God has mercy and sends someone to help you see the right path and get directed in the right way. And once he does, then he will be able to repent of the things that he has said and the things that he has thought about God and turn to God, and God will forgive him. And he will then have the freshness of life. And that is really what happened at the end of Job. So it's very, very interesting that Elihu pretty well states what will later happen, most likely without really understanding that that would be the answer, but he's certainly hopeful for it. The word interpreter, by the way, he uses mediator and angel, but the word in the Hebrew is also interpreter or ambassador, someone who would come and explain to a man who is going through this the right answer instead of coming up like his friends did with the wrong answer. So anyway, I wanted you to see that before we went on to the next section. And as I said, this happens exactly like it does when you read chapter 41, 1 through 14. And notice especially then at verse 30, God is doing all these things to bring his soul back from the pit, that he may be lighted with the light of light. We always have to remember, and this is where Job seems to miss this, but God wants everybody to be saved. God is doing all things for good, and he's not doing anything for evil. So when our trials come, and frustrations and unfairness and inequities and all the things that come along, that it just isn't fair, and it just seems to be pounding on us over and over again, we really have to. It's very difficult to do this, but we really have to step back and go, okay, I need to trust that God is going to bring me through this, and that God knows what he's doing and what he's doing with my life right now. This is not necessarily being done to me without God's approval. In other words, God let Satan do it. So I need to face it better than what we typically face these things. Okay, so that's going to be the big point that we're going to get to here. All right, chapter 34. You might remember that we mentioned that in chapter 33, Elihu gives Job a chance to answer him. Job is silent, which means that we would look at Elihu's words so far, and something has rung in Job's mind to think, some of these things I hadn't thought of. I need to be quiet and let him go on and speak. So that's a pretty cool thought. All right, so chapter 34 then. Notice just specifically down through verse 5 and 6, Elihu goes on, verse 2, and says, "Hear my words, you wise men," talking to the friends too, "and give ear to me, you who know. For the ear tests words as the palate tastes food. For let us choose what is right. Let us know among ourselves what is good." Can you see something that would impress you about Elihu right here? What he says, especially in verse 3? Something stand out to you about how he approaches that? Maybe in contrast to what he could have said or might have said.
The idea of consideration.
Yeah.
He's willing to chew on something that
Yeah. He says, let us, all of us, you wise men, come together and consider some things. Certainly, he's already said, I'm going to present some things that you've not maybe talked about before and used, But let's come together and evaluate this. So people, you'll read a lot of commentaries and stuff that says Elihu's an arrogant dweeb, and he's saying all this stuff. But in actuality, there's a lot of things that he says. He's blunt. He's to the point. There's a lot of things he says that indicate that he's saying, hey, let's just be reasonable about this. Let's take a look at some things that you may not have thought of. So then in verse 5 and 6, he says, for Job has said, I am in the right, and God has taken away my right. In spite of my right, I am counted a liar. My wound is incurable, though I am without transgression. All right, so if you think about that in regard to what Job has said in the past, can you see the flaw in what he said? He just, hey, I'm in the right. What does that then mean about God? Yeah, it's just an implication there that I know I'm right about this, and I know that, and God isn't answering, and God's not doing something about this. And we've seen this before, where Job just in essence says, if you come down and have a conversation with me, you'd have to back it off, because I've got the answer here, and I know I'm right about this. There is just no question. But the reason he's so confident is because he only knows one other answer. And the other answer is, I've sinned, and God's punishing me. And he knows that's not right, so then he concludes that he's right. But one of the things we always need to understand in our conclusions is sometimes there's an answer we hadn't thought of. And it's not just either or, it's multiple choice. There are some other answers to that we might not have considered here. So we see this answer here. So Elihu now quotes an accusation against God. And here's what's different. The friends guessed at Job's sins and started making up things that Job had done. You'll notice how Elihu goes directly to the things he has firsthand heard Job say. So that's a major difference here. He's not jumping in like the friends and going, I'm going to indict you for, and make a big list of sins that he had no idea whether Job did or not. He has been sitting there the whole time, and he's heard Job use these words, and therefore he's approaching this. We mentioned last week that the friend said you're suffering because of sin that you've done in your life, but Elihu says your suffering has caused you to sin. And words. That is something we all need to pay careful attention to. I double dog dare you to go through a really bad trial and not make some huge mistakes and say some things you shouldn't have said. Whew. That is an impossibility. It's just so difficult under pressure not to make some dumb statements, some statements that are ill-advised, and not think correctly and balanced. So that's one thing we want to learn from the trial. Watch our mouths. Be careful what we say. Have a good friends who can be there for us. I remember good friends that I had who would very gently say, well, you probably ought not think about it that way. Consider this. And I go, oh, good, thank you. Yep. That was not good thinking. So that's very, very important for us. All right, now look. Any questions about just his statement there, 5 and 6? Are we doing good? If you have a question, be sure and just jump in. All right, so verse 7. He says, what man is like Job, who drinks up scoffing like water, who travels in company with evildoers and walks with wicked men? For he has said, it profits a man nothing that he should take delight in God. Now, at first, that may sound like the friends. Remember, the friends would say, well, he's just done wicked, and all this kind of stuff. But you remember, when he gets to verse 9 here, he's identifying specifically what Job has said. He's not guessing and going back, as we mentioned. He's identifying specifically here what Job has said. And when you look at the end of verse 9 especially, it profits a man nothing that he should take delight in God. You might not find exact words like that from Job, but that was the essence of a lot of his speeches. So what is the problem with that kind of attitude? Saying it doesn't profit anything to take delight. What would Job actually be saying in those words? That it doesn't profit. That God's not going to, it doesn't profit to take delight in God.
There's no gain in following what God tells you to do.
Yeah, and what kind of gain? Specifically,
In his case, earthly gain.
right. He's talking about physical things. This remind you of Ecclesiastes, doesn't it? Well, what's the point of this? Why I lived righteously and good and all of this, and here's what I get? That doesn't make any sense. So you can see that he's not far off from the friends who say, well, if you're suffering, it's obviously because you haven't been righteous and you're a sinner. Well, and then Job is basically saying, if I have been righteous and innocent, why am I suffering? It's almost saying the same thing, and that's why Elihu basically says, you're following the thinking of evildoers. You're scoffing like them. Why would I serve God? I see righteous people suffering. If I'm a wicked person, I don't see any benefit of that. So you can see what he is actually pointing out here in these verses. So it's just a summary there. Though Job didn't actually say these words is identical, it's the essence of his speeches. So what really is the profit in serving God? And it's the wrong answer. It's the wrong question, really. Okay.
Is he calling the friends evildoers here? Because that's what
it could be an inference there. Yeah, could be a little inference there as well. No doubt there are times when he's going, his correction is going to hit both of them. Yeah, no doubt about that. All right, so then look at verses 10 through 12. Therefore hear me, you men of understanding. Far be it from God that he should do wickedness, and from the Almighty that he should do wrong. For according to the work of man he'll repay him, and according to his ways he will make it befall him. Of a truth, God will not do wickedly, and the Almighty will not pervert justice. Okay, how does that answer what Job has said, and maybe even what the friends have said?
God's not wrong.
Yeah, good. God's not wrong. And so even if you were the friends, they are saying that God should have punished him even worse, and they are saying things about him he shouldn't have said. But Job has basically questioned God's justice and righteousness in this whole ordeal. And so a great statement. God is simply not wrong here. He's not making a mistake. He's not going to pervert justice. He's not going to do wickedly. He's going to judge fairly and justly. So it is not right for you to say those things.
He also says that it also implies that the character of God and his actions are always in line. Like his character cannot go against his actions.
Okay, I didn't quite understand you. I'm sorry.
character can't go against his actions.
Character can't go against, yes.
God's character in terms of justice and his actions
Right.
are always in alignment.
Yeah, good. Yeah, when you have the perfect character of God, and this is what he's going to follow up with a little bit. That's a good point, because he's going to follow up on that. How can you indict God? He's not indictable. That's right.
It seems like it's the perfect statement to make them realize you've gone off in the wrong direction. There's got to be something else. He's actually said, let's consider, and the first thing he says is what you said about God can't be right. So let's look at something else.
You can see how Elihu is the defender of God throughout this. And he even makes that point when he gets chapter 36. I'm speaking on behalf of God. He is very, very upset about how people, even the friends, have guessed about what God is doing. And Job, of course, has made all kinds of rash statements about what God is doing. And so he is really being the defender of God here. Look at verses 13 through 17 now, as he will go on to point this out. Who gave him charge over the earth, and who laid on him the whole world? What does that question mean?
Nobody made him do it. Nobody made him do it.
Made him? Wait a minute.
God created the earth. God did.
Okay, yeah. Who And the key word there is the word gave. Who gave God charge over the earth? Yeah, nobody did. Which means his statement is, he's the biggest of all. He is in power and authority. Nobody gave to God so that he could do anything. God is all sufficient, independent of everything else, and there is no need. Who laid on him the whole world? Who said to God, okay, I'm going to give you the whole world and you order it and you... Nobody did. So when you're questioning God, then what are you doing?
Yeah, when God starts his rebuke, that's what he starts his questioning with.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah.
You know, who initiates the win?
Yeah.
Have you ever been on down
Right.
So this statement that Elihu makes is exactly God's argument, or what Elihu writes about
Yes.
God's argument.
Yes.
For the rest of the book.
That's such a good point. If you didn't hear it, Chip makes the point that later when God starts his speech with Job, that's where he's going to start. You know, who made this? Where were you when the stars? You know, he's going to go through all these things to indicate that you have nothing to speak about. You should have kept your mouth shut. Of course, the first half of God's speech, Job is going to say, well, shut my mouth. I should have never said anything. And you're right. That's exactly right. So you see him say that, verse 14. If he should set his heart to it and gather to himself his spirit and his breath, all flesh would perish together and man would return to dust. So his argument, God is so powerful that he could just take the breath all back and everybody would be dead. He's the one who gave the breath. He can go like that and it's all gone. He's the creator you're talking to. Have a little respect. Exactly. And then verse 15, all flesh would perish together and man would return to dust. If you have understanding, hear this. Listen to what I say. Shall one who hates justice govern? Will you condemn him who is righteous and mighty? Who says to a king, worthless one, and to nobles, wicked man, who shows no partiality to princes, nor regards the rich more than the poor, for they are all the work of his hands. So he says, you think that God would hate justice? Will you condemn the righteous and the almighty? Literally? Is that how you're going to think about God? So who gave you charge? Who gave God charge of all? So that who can question him is the idea here. So in verses 18 through 30, what you're going to see is proofs of God's righteous judgment. So that's what Elihu's going to do in these next number of verses. He's going to give proofs of God's righteous judgments. So his first proof here is verses 18 and 19, what we just read. Here is God who says to kings, worthless one, and to nobles, wicked man. And he shows no partiality to princes. He doesn't regard the rich more than the poor. They're all the work of his hands. So you're accusing God of injustice, and yet God didn't show any partiality. God doesn't care if you're a king or you're a pauper. He is going to judge righteously and justly. So there is basically his first proof. Secondly, verse 20. In a moment they die, at midnight the people are shaken and pass away, and the mighty are taken away by no human hand. So the next proof, the time of God's judgment is unpredictable. When does he take away life? When would he judge? Well, right there at midnight. What's so special about midnight?
Sleeping and not expecting.
Yeah, that's right. You're sleeping and not expecting it. It is the one time when you wouldn't be prepared for it at all. And so he says, in his time, it's not predictable. He's going to do it in his time. What does Job think? What has he thought? Why isn't he doing it now? Why isn't he doing this? Why isn't he doing that? What? Ooh, man, once you see these answers, you go, ooh, That is total silliness to be demanding that God do something in your time and when you think He ought to do it. And God is saying, Elihu is saying, wait a minute, God's going to do this when He wants to do it. This is in His time and it's under His control. Verses 18-30 again, proofs of God's righteous judgment. Verse 21 and 22. For His eyes are on the ways of man, and He sees all his steps. There is no gloom or deep darkness where evildoers may hide themselves. So, if God sees everything and knows everything, then what do you conclude about His ability to make proper decisions and judgments? Well, I think He's got this. And I think little old dumb human beings like this do not have a right to question Him. So Elihu's words are spot on here. You simply can't look at it that way. And so therefore you can't accuse God of not judging correctly. Verse 23. For God has no need to consider a man further that he should go before God in judgment. All right, what does that mean? That's a great statement. What do you think, Belinda?
Christian Standard Version is right here. Well, I just lost my verse. Tell me verse one. I just lost it. 23. Thank you. God does not need to examine a person further that one should approach him in judgment.
Yeah. So, which translation was that? Christian Standard. Okay, so, God, considering all these things that we've just read about God and His knowledge, He doesn't really need to go into court and have a man judge Him. Well, there you go. Yes, I think that would be really taking a step that I should not take, to call upon God to meet me in court. I'll set out my arguments, you'll set out your arguments, which is exactly what Job said. We'll set out our arguments, and He will find me to be right, which means He was wrong. Woo! We hit Job pretty hard on this, but again, remember, we know things he didn't know. And this is written for our learning so that we learn things and don't make those same mistakes. And in spite of that, we will all find ourselves during trials to make some of these same mistakes. You'll look in the mirror and go, I'm shocked at you. Why have you thought this way? You should have known better. You read Job. So verse 23 is great. God has no need to consider man's opinions or be brought into judgment then by man. All right, going on. And so then in verse... Did I go here? Did I mess something up? I probably did. I did that. 24 and 25. Yeah, got it. All right, so 24 and 25. He shatters the mighty without investigation and sets others in their place. Thus knowing their works, He overturns them in the night, and they are crushed. So what does He mean when He says He shatters the mighty without investigation? Okay, yeah. He doesn't need to investigate, he already knows. What happens when someone is indicted with a crime nowadays? Well, maybe about 3 years from now, we'll get into court and actually put this all together and find out the answer. And then maybe not. God doesn't need to investigate. He doesn't need to call all His angels and say, for the next couple of centuries, would you look at this and see if we, excuse me, see if we can make the right decision about this. He knows their works, and He overturns them in a night. They are crushed. God can judge without any kind of investigation like man would do here. So He already knows what God is up to, what man is up to. He doesn't need any help. Then look at verse 26 and 27, or 26 through 28. He strikes them for their wickedness in a place for all to see, because they turned aside from following him and had no regard for any of his ways. So that they crushed the cry of the poor to come to him, and he heard the cry of the afflicted. So here's another proof of God's righteous judgment. He will judge. When he judges, it will be plain for all. It will be a public judgment. There will be no doubt about it. Now, in the case of the friends' arguments concerning Job, there was doubt. Is this punishment, or is it something else? And I'm persuaded Elihu, well, he says in the beginning of his speeches, you guys said wrong things about Job. You can't just sit there and guess about him doing bad things and then come up with a conclusion. That's not right. So the idea then being that God here, when he judges, it will be plain to see, it will be public, and there will be no doubts about his judgment. You won't have to sit back and go, was that guy righteous or not? That will be plain for all to see. But then look at verse 29 and 30. Here's an interesting one. When he is quiet, and he here is God, who can condemn? When he hides his face, who can behold him, whether it be a nation or a man? That a godless man should not reign, that he should not ensnare the people. So some of these next number of words in this chapter are going to be a bit challenging, but we're taking the best route we can figure out here. But I think the best way to look at that is especially verse 20. It says in verse 20, when he is quiet, who can condemn? What would it mean in contrast to the previous verses that God is quiet?
Maybe he doesn't do anything to the wicked. You think they just
Yeah.
that God doesn't do anything?
Good, that's right. But what if God doesn't do anything on the moment to those who are wicked? What if he decides to just be quiet here and not do anything right away? Does that mean that God is not reigning or not in control or any of those things? You see, you are like this nobody down here on earth, and you're deciding you know everything God is doing based on what you can see. That doesn't mean anything. You cannot judge God just by your own human judgment and what you can then see. The evidence isn't all before you. So there's the silliness. If God chooses to delay judgment, doesn't mean there's any knock on God. In fact, he is still up there, and if we're understanding verse 30, he's still there working with or doing something about a godless man that is reigning and about those of his people that may be ensnared by him. He's still there for them and working with them and doing something about this. Then 31 through 33. For has anyone said to God, I have borne punishment, I will not offend any more? Teach me what I do not see. If I have done iniquity, I will do it no more. Will he then make payment to suit you? Because you reject it, for you must choose, and not I. Therefore declare what you know. That for every commentator on this, that's a difficult text. And everybody's going, By the way, if you ever wonder why sometimes you read a text and you have a lot of different scholars that are going, well, it might be this and it might be this, and they're admitting that it's a challenging text. You always have to remember that the Hebrew in many places is very difficult to translate. So give them a little grace. The Hebrew is a very ancient language, and some of those words are a little tough to understand. So the idea, though, seems to be, should Job admit that Job should admit that he has said some things that should not have been said, and that he, after doing that, should have repented, and he should ask for God to teach him the things that he does not know. So seems to be the idea in the text. As I said, very, very difficult text, and everyone notes that. I would note with you the NLT's translation of verse 33, which I think is helpful. Must God tailor his justice to your demands? Pretty good summation. That going to hit the nail on the head there. So Job, does God have to tailor his way of doing justice? Does he have to tailor it to your demands, to your thinking? See, these are really good words. They're really important for Job to understand. And no wonder when he gets to the end of each of these speeches, Job is silent and says, go ahead. I am not going to say anything more about it. And then verse 34 through 37, men of understanding will say to me, and the wise man who hears me will say, Job speaks without knowledge. His words are without insight. Would that Job were tried to the end, because he answers like wicked men. For he adds rebellion to his sin. He claps his hands among us and multiplies his words against God. So it seems here that Elihu is saying, I'm going to quote to you what wise people have said about what you're doing here, and basically with the implication he agrees with that. And the idea is, Job, really, you've said some things without knowledge. You should acquiesce to God's rule over your life. One of the challenges that are always in a trial, and we've mentioned this before, are simply the ideas that we begin to demand that things get fixed. And we don't know why it won't get fixed quicker than what it's being fixed. And we're impatient, and we then wonder why God isn't doing what we think we ought to do. One of the things we noticed this morning in Ecclesiastes 3, all the seasons, and then he says at the end of verse 9, what profit has the worker in all he does under the sun? Meaning, what profit is to try to adjust the seasons of life, the bad times and the good times, to my benefit? You can't change them. So it's similar with a trial. It's not wise to not acquiesce to God's control. And that's what Job hasn't done. So he has not acquiesced to God's control. He's argued with God. He's said this isn't right, and etc., and basically accused God of things he didn't do and shouldn't have accused him of. Into verse 37, he multiplies his words against God. Key thing there. All right? Any comments, questions on that last section? Got that? All right, so chapter 35 is a short one. We'll conclude the answers here that he gives. So notice then at the beginning of 35, and Elihu answered and said. So there is an implication that Elihu stopped, gave Job an opportunity. Job doesn't do anything, so he answered and said, do you think this to be just? Do you say, it is my right before God that you ask, what advantage have I? How am I better off than if I had sinned? So, again, another quotation basically out of Job's speeches, and the statement being, do you really think that your words are just before God? Imagine Elihu saying that and just looking at Job. By the way, you notice the word you? No more friends here. He's not directing his word. He's looking right at Job. And he says, do you really think your words were just? Do you really think that you said the right thing there? Suddenly, maybe you're feeling Job back up and say, yeah, pretty strong words that I had used. And so he's silent and listens. Verse 4, I will answer you and your friends with you. Look at the heavens and see, and behold the clouds which are higher than you. If you have sinned, what do you accomplish against him? And if your transgressions are multiplied, what do you do to him? So that would be the answer to the friends part. But then the answer to Job. If you are righteous, what do you give to him? Or what does he receive from your hand? Your wickedness concerns a man like yourself, and your righteousness a son of man. Let's stop right there with verse 8. So what Elihu is saying is, how is your wickedness or your righteousness going to somehow do something to God in which he just feels like he's got to do something to you, or that if you're righteous, that he's got to answer you according to your standards or wishes? So first, friends, you're wrong in saying that somehow God's just been so abused that he's got to do something mean to Job. And then Job, you're wrong because you think that God ought to react to you based on your righteousness in the ways that you think he ought to react to you. Your righteousness or wickedness does not personally, now God doesn't like it obviously because he wants the best for you, but it's not personally making God go, okay, or yes, let me reward you. This is not the system. That's what Satan said. That Satan said, once he finds out you won't reward him, he'll dump you. So you can see how Elihu's trying to navigate that and get rid of that idea. All right, now notice verse 9. This is, to me, this is one of the best parts of Elihu's words. Was very, very helpful to me. Because of the multitude of oppressions, people cry out. They call for help because of the arm of the mighty. But none says, where is God my maker, who gives songs in the night, who teaches us more than the beasts of the earth, and makes us wiser than the birds of the heavens. There they cry out, but he does not answer because of the pride of evil men. Surely God does not hear an empty cry, nor does the Almighty regard it. How much less when you say that you do not see him, that the case is before him, and you are waiting for him. Okay. Now, examine the words, just especially verse 9 through 11. Look at the words. When there's a multitude of oppressions, people cry out. They call for help from the Almighty. What is he saying people do?
Reminds me of Egypt when they were slaves.
Okay? There's a lot of crying out. That's right. What aren't they doing?
They're not crying out before that.
Well, yeah, but they're not crying out before that. But also in that, there's a difference that he's making here. I don't know if you can spot it.
They don't cry out to God.
Yeah. Was Job crying out to God? Yes, but there's a different, when you say, yeah. But none, see, notice that contrast in verse 9 and 10. You're right on the slight right thing. So they cry out and they want help from the arm of the Almighty. They want the Almighty to do something about this. But none says, where is God my maker, who gives songs in the night, who teaches us more than the beasts of the earth? There's two different ways of approaching your trial. What's the second way? What'd you say, Belinda?
Praise, wanting to develop a relationship.
Yeah. You're crying out of a prayer of faith and honor and respect to God. You're realizing he is the one who you trust beyond anything else. Job isn't trusting. Job's crying out because of pain. Job's crying out because he thinks God's left him. And he's like, whoop, why aren't you doing something about this? But the difference is, we need to cry out not for seeking how the trial can be, that we are not crying out to seek how the trial can help me, can teach me, and how I can find comfort in God. It's a different approach. It's a cry of faith, not a cry of complaint. That may feel weird, but there's where you could be talking to somebody, like if you are a friend or a helper of someone going through a bad trial, And they may say something to you like, I've prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed. And I know that eventually God's going to fix this. No, you don't know that. God may not fix this. He is not interested in the fixing as much he's interested in your trust and growth and your faith and you absolutely knowing that whatever God wants to do is his business. I'm going to repeat a quick story here. I know some of you have heard me say it, but I want everybody to get the story in your mind. I think of it all the time. I was in a marriage seminar way back in the 70s, and one of the teachers was telling a story about how to treat your wife when something goes wrong. And he said, I have always wanted to have a Chevy Suburban. And I saved and saved and saved so that I could buy a Chevy Suburban. And I finally got enough money and I bought a brand new Chevy Suburban, and I'd put it in the garage and I'd kiss it goodnight and I'd dust it off and all this, and I was just so happy to have a Chevy Suburban. And one morning my wife said to me, I need to use the Suburban this morning. Would you take my car to work instead? And I thought, oh no, oh no. And so I said, well, sure, honey. And I went to work and I came home, and there's the Chevy Suburban sitting out in the driveway. She had backed it into a pole. I'd put a big dent in the back. And he said, my first response is, I cannot believe that woman. What? And he's just spitting and everything else. And he says, I finally stepped back and thought, wait a minute. This is not your Chevy Suburban. It's God's Chevy Suburban. And if God wants to ruin a perfectly good Chevy Suburban, that's his business. Now, I've used that concerning my life many, many times, especially in the midst of severe trial. If God wants to ruin a perfectly good life, that's his business. And it's helped me over and over again to get through a trial. And this text, I think, embodies that idea. You cry out to God, but are you trusting that what is taking place here is God's business? And if he wants to bring you through this, he knows what he's doing. And we cannot question him the way Job would question him. So, hope that little illustration, if you hadn't heard it, will hopefully help you. All right. So that brings all of this to a conclusion here. Job has presented his case before God time and again, and then complains that God will not answer and God will not come to the rescue. And basically Elihu says, well, the basic thing is that it's an empty cry. You're not really putting your trust in God. So those last couple of words, verses 15 and 16. And now because his anger does not punish and he does not take much note of transgression. In other words, you're fortunate, Job, that God has not taken into account the words you have said so far and actually come and punished you for sin. But he's overlooked that. Job opens his mouth in empty talk. He multiplies words without knowledge. So there are bringing then to the final words of this next speech that he gives, and that prepares us then for 36 and 37, where now he will introduce God. All right? So I hope this is encouraging you. I hope this is teaching you a lot about not only preparing you for a trial, but especially also in helping us all to have compassion on those who go through trials and to answer correctly and not incorrectly. All right? So we're going to sing a song right now. If there's any way we can help anyone, we would certainly urge you to take that opportunity now. Well, together, let's stand and sing.